"This work is absolute trash," she shouted, swiping all my files into the recycle bin. "Try again if you can." I watched months of effort disappear, then answered the incoming call. "Yes, I accept your $400,000 offer to be your creative director." Her arrogant expression crumbled when. "Yes, I accept your $400,000 offer to be your creative director." The words left my mouth while Bethany's face drained of color across the conference room. 30 seconds earlier she had deleted my entire creative portfolio in front of our entire team, believing she was eliminating a problem employee. Instead, she had just handed me the perfect weapon for the most satisfying workplace revenge imaginable. The timing was so perfect it felt orchestrated by the universe itself. But this story really begins 2.5 years earlier, when I walked into what I thought was a creative agency and discovered it was actually a design factory. September rain pelted the windows of Meridian Creative Studios as I pushed through glass doors that promised creative innovation but delivered corporate mediocrity. My portfolio bag contained everything I believed design could accomplish: university projects that told stories, freelance work that captured authentic brand personalities, concepts that connected emotionally with audiences. I was ready to join what Portland's business community considered a rising creative force. Before we continue with this revenge story, if you've ever felt undervalued at work or had your creativity dismissed by jealous supervisors, please hit subscribe. It's free and helps us reach more creatives who need this validation. Now let's see how my secret strategy unfolds. The reception area looked impressive enough. Polished concrete floors, exposed brick walls, industrial lighting that screamed, "We're artsy." But something felt immediately wrong. The activity buzzing around me was mechanical, repetitive. Designers hunched over monitors clicking through template libraries instead of sketching original ideas. The walls displayed framed client campaigns that shared an unsettling similarity: different company names, identical visual approaches. "You must be Lucia." Bethany Voss materialized beside me without warning, her smile sharp and calculating. She was younger than I'd expected for a creative director, probably early 30s, with perfectly styled blonde hair and a wardrobe that cost more than most designers' monthly salaries. Everything about her screamed control and authority. "I'm Bethany, your new creative director. We need to establish some ground rules immediately." Her office was a shrine to efficiency over inspiration. Color-coded filing systems lined one wall, productivity charts tracked every designer's billable hours, and motivational posters about meeting deadlines replaced any actual creative work. Not a single piece of original artwork, cultural artifact, or source of inspiration anywhere. The space felt like an accountant's office pretending to be creative. "Let me be absolutely clear about expectations," she began, opening a thick binder labeled Standard Operating Procedures, with the reverence most people reserved for religious texts. "We run a professional operation here. Clients receive quality results on schedule and within budget. They don't need creative therapy sessions or personal storytelling adventures. They need functional logos, effective brochures, and websites that generate business." She flipped through pages of templates and style guides with obvious pride. Everything was systematized, categorized, reduced to formulas that eliminated creativity in favor of predictable outcomes. "This is what professional design looks like," she continued, showing me their client portfolio. "Consistent, reliable, efficient. No artistic ego trips or experimental concepts that confuse clients." My stomach dropped as I examined their work. A restaurant's branding looked identical to a law firm's, which looked exactly like a tech startup's. The only variations were color schemes and fonts. Every project followed the same visual formula regardless of industry, target audience, or brand personality. The previous senior designer lasted exactly 6 months before deciding our standards were too demanding, Bethany added with obvious satisfaction. She kept talking about authentic brand storytelling and cultural sensitivity. Pure nonsense that wasted billable hours and confused clients who just wanted professional results. I realized with growing horror that I had walked into a creative wasteland where authentic brand connection had been completely sacrificed for efficiency metrics and template-based production. This wasn't a design agency. It was a digital assembly line. My first week at Meridian confirmed every terrible suspicion. Colleagues worked with mechanical precision, opening template files and swapping out text and images like factory workers assembling identical products. Nobody asked questions about client histories, cultural backgrounds, or brand personalities. They simply executed predetermined formulas that guaranteed mediocre results. During lunch breaks, I began secretly researching our clients to understand who they actually were beyond the template treatments they received. Marcus Holloway owned a craft brewery that struggled to connect with younger demographics despite producing excellent beer. Their current branding could have belonged to any brewery in America, generic, forgettable, completely disconnected from their actual story. But buried in a brief client call transcript, I discovered something fascinating. Marcus had mentioned that his grandfather had been a brewmaster in Germany before immigrating to Oregon in the 1940s. That single detail sparked possibilities that Bethany's template approach would never explore. What if we told the story of brewing traditions crossing oceans and generations? I spent 3 evenings at local Portland pubs, talking to bartenders and longtime residents about the city's brewing heritage. I learned about Prohibition-era speakeasies, post-war immigration patterns, and how European brewing techniques had shaped Pacific Northwest beer culture. Marcus's family story wasn't just personal history, it was part of Portland's cultural DNA. My research filled a private notebook that I kept carefully hidden from Bethany's surveillance. These weren't official client files. They were human stories waiting to be transformed into authentic creative work. Every conversation revealed connections between personal histories and business visions that template designs completely ignored. The breakthrough came when I developed preliminary concepts honoring Marcus's grandfather's German brewing traditions while celebrating Portland's modern craft beer scene. The logo incorporated vintage typography reminiscent of 1940s brewery signage, with subtle references to both German heritage and Oregon landscapes. The brand's story connected immigration courage to entrepreneurial spirit, tradition to innovation. Marcus's reaction was immediate and emotional. 20 years in business and nobody has ever understood what my brewery actually represents, he said, studying the concepts with obvious amazement. This captures everything I've been trying to express but never knew how to articulate. The rebrand generated immediate results that vindicated everything I believed about authentic storytelling. Sales increased 30% within 8 weeks, and Marcus extended our contract for additional packaging design worth $35,000. But more importantly, he started referring other brewery owners who wanted the same cultural storytelling approach. My second major breakthrough came through Elena Vasquez, whose sustainable fashion boutique had been struggling with generic environmental messaging that felt preachy and disconnected from her actual values. Bethany had prescribed the usual sustainability template: green colors, leaf imagery, standard eco-friendly slogans that could have applied to any environmentally conscious business. But during casual conversation, Elena mentioned something that changed everything. Her grandmother had taught her traditional Mexican embroidery techniques passed down through generations. These weren't just sewing skills. They were cultural preservation methods that connected sustainable practices to ancestral wisdom. I requested permission to visit her workshop, claiming I needed to understand her production process for accurate brand messaging. What I actually wanted was to learn about the cultural traditions that motivated her business philosophy beyond surface-level environmentalism. Elena's workspace revealed extraordinary depth that template approaches completely missed. Hand-sewn samples showcased intricate patterns her grandmother had learned as a child in Guadalajara. Each stitch carried cultural significance: family protection symbols, agricultural abundance patterns, spiritual connection motifs. The sustainable fashion wasn't just environmental activism, it was cultural heritage preservation. I spent an entire weekend photographing Elena's hands recreating her grandmother's embroidery techniques, capturing the meditation and intention behind each careful stitch. The resulting campaign told stories about how traditional craftsmanship offered alternatives to fast fashion's environmental destruction. Instead of generic "save the planet" messaging, we created copies celebrating ancestral wisdom that understood sustainable practices long before environmentalism became trendy. The visuals showcased Elena's hands working with techniques her grandmother had used, creating powerful connections between cultural heritage and modern sustainability. The response exceeded every expectation. Social media engagement increased 340%. 12 new wholesale clients specifically mentioned being moved by the family story connection, and Elena's boutique transformed from struggling startup to recognized leader in conscious fashion. But the real validation came when Elena invited me to her grandmother's 80th birthday celebration, where I met 3 other small business owners who later became clients specifically because they wanted to work with the designer who understands family stories. As word spread through Portland's entrepreneurial community, something unprecedented began happening. Clients started bypassing Meridian's official communication channels to contact me directly. Marcus would text photos of new beer label concepts, asking for creative feedback that went far beyond our contracted services. Elena sent updates about her grandmother's health and how it influenced her seasonal collections. These personal connections violated every boundary Bethany had established, but they generated real business results that couldn't be argued with. Referrals came through relationships rather than cold sales calls. Clients renewed contracts because they felt understood and valued, not just professionally served. I maintained detailed records of these personal connections in encrypted files on my personal laptop: birthday reminders, family milestone celebrations, business challenge discussions, dreams for future growth. Information that would never fit into Meridian's standardized client management system but proved essential for creating truly personalized creative solutions. The network grew organically as satisfied clients introduced me to other entrepreneurs who valued authentic storytelling over template design. Within 18 months, I had cultivated relationships with over 30 business owners who trusted me with their most important brand decisions. But this success was creating an increasingly dangerous situation with Bethany, who viewed personal client relationships as unprofessional boundary violations rather than the foundation of sustainable creative partnerships that were generating record revenue for the agency. The December holiday party at Meridian should have been a celebration of our record-breaking year. Client retention had reached an all-time high, referrals were flooding in, and several campaigns had won regional awards. Instead, I found myself standing near the catering table, overhearing a conversation that would shatter my understanding of everything I thought I knew about my workplace dynamics. "Bethany, sweetheart, we need to discuss the creative department's direction." Trevor Ashford's voice carried across the conference room where he'd cornered my supervisor near the bar setup. I froze, pretending to examine the cheese selection while straining to hear their conversation. The casual intimacy in his tone caught my attention. This wasn't how bosses typically addressed employees. "Dad, I've got everything under control," Bethany replied, and my blood went cold. Dad? Trevor wasn't just the founder, he was her father-in-law. The pieces suddenly clicked into place with devastating clarity. Bethany's unshakable confidence despite mediocre results, her immunity to criticism, her ability to reassign successful projects without consequences, it all made sense now. "The client satisfaction scores are concerning," Trevor continued, glancing around to ensure they weren't being overheard. "Board members are asking questions about our retention strategies. They want to know why our numbers improved so dramatically this year." Bethany's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Creative people are just difficult to manage, Trevor. You know how they get all emotional about their work, thinking they're artists instead of service providers. The real problem is designers who overcomplicate simple projects and create unrealistic client expectations." My hands trembled as I reached for a napkin, realizing she was talking about me. "Take Lucia for example," she continued, confirming my worst fears. "She's constantly playing therapist with clients instead of focusing on actual design work. All that research and personal connection nonsense makes other clients think they deserve the same treatment. It's unsustainable and unprofessional." Cameron Ashford, a man I now realized was Bethany's husband and Trevor's son, appeared beside them holding a whiskey. He barely glanced up from his phone as he nodded along with his wife's assessment. "Whatever you think is best, honey. You're the creative expert." Standing there with party noise swirling around me, I understood that I wasn't just dealing with a difficult supervisor. I was threatening the career security of someone who had married into ownership and felt entitled to creative control regardless of actual talent or business results. This wasn't about design philosophy. It was about protecting family interests. 3 weeks later, I was working late on Elena's spring collection campaign when I heard unexpected voices from the conference room. Thursday evenings were typically dead quiet, but laughter and conversation suggested some kind of gathering. Curiosity overcame professional boundaries and I crept closer to investigate. Trevor was hosting what appeared to be a weekly poker game with several local business owners. Cards, chips, and empty beer bottles covered the conference table while cigar smoke created a hazy atmosphere that reeked of old boys networking. I recognized a few faces from Portland's business community, including Gordon Rivers, who owned a struggling print shop downtown. "Madison's been having trouble finding decent design work since graduation," Gordon was saying, sorting his poker chips with obvious frustration. "Art school fills their heads with all these creative ideas, but nobody wants to hire someone without experience." Catch-22 situation. Bethany, who had apparently joined their boys' club despite being the only woman present, leaned forward with interest. "We might be able to help Madison gain some real-world experience here at Meridian. Fresh perspective could be exactly what we need." Trevor seemed hesitant, probably calculating salary costs. "We're pretty well staffed right now, especially in the creative department. Not sure we have room for additional designers." "Actually," Bethany continued with calculated precision, "some designers create more problems than solutions. All that hand-holding and personal relationship building might seem impressive, but it's not scalable or efficient. Fresh talent who understands professional boundaries might be exactly what our clients need." My stomach dropped as I realized she was orchestrating my replacement through her father-in-law's poker connections. Gordon Rivers enthusiastically offered to waive Madison's usual salary requirements in exchange for professional experience, making the arrangement even more appealing from a budget perspective. "Madison's young, eager, and won't have any bad habits to unlearn," Bethany added with obvious satisfaction. "Sometimes you need to clear out the underbrush before new growth can flourish." The metaphor wasn't subtle. I was the underbrush that needed clearing to make room for someone's inexperienced daughter who would follow orders without question or creative resistance. My research into Madison Rivers revealed everything I feared about Bethany's replacement strategy. Her online portfolio consisted entirely of student exercises, basic logo variations, template-based layouts, and conceptual work that had never faced real client scrutiny or market testing. Her LinkedIn profile showed zero professional design experience beyond a summer internship at her father's print shop, where she had apparently organized filing systems and answered customer phone calls. Her Instagram account painted an even more concerning picture. Endless selfies at coffee shops with MacBook props, aesthetic flat-lay photos of design supplies, and inspirational quotes about creativity that revealed someone more interested in the lifestyle of being a designer than the actual craft of visual communication. The qualifications mismatch was staggering. Marcus Holloway's brewery rebranding had required deep understanding of Portland's cultural heritage, craft beer industry dynamics, and the emotional complexity of honoring immigration stories through visual identity. Elena Vasquez's sustainable fashion campaign demanded cultural sensitivity around traditional Mexican craftsmanship and sophisticated messaging about environmental responsibility. Madison's most complex project appeared to be concert posters for university parties, work that required basic text hierarchy and decorative elements but none of the strategic thinking, cultural research, or authentic storytelling that had generated hundreds of thousands in new revenue for Meridian. Yet Bethany was planning to replace proven success with nepotistic favoritism, apparently believing that enthusiasm and willingness to follow orders could substitute for experience, cultural competence, and demonstrated results. Once I understood Bethany's replacement strategy, her behavior shifted into deliberate sabotage mode. She began assigning contradictory deadlines that required completing major projects simultaneously, knowing that maintaining my quality standards would become mathematically impossible. The brewery's seasonal packaging campaign and Elena's spring collection branding both received identical deadlines despite requiring completely different research approaches and creative development time. When clients requested revisions, a normal part of any creative process, Bethany would delay approving my proposed changes until the last possible moment, creating artificial time pressure that forced rushed decisions. She would hold revision requests for days, then express concern about timeline delays as if she hadn't been the bottleneck. Her most manipulative tactic involved excluding me from initial client consultations while claiming schedule conflicts, then providing only secondhand information about project requirements. She would relay abbreviated briefs that missed crucial details about brand personality, target audience concerns, or cultural sensitivities, then express disappointment when my designs didn't capture elements I had never been informed about. I thought you would have intuited that the restaurant client wanted to emphasize their farm-to-table sourcing, she said during one particularly frustrating review session. Good designers shouldn't need everything spelled out explicitly. These tactics were clearly designed to create a paper trail of missed deadlines and client dissatisfaction that would justify my termination. I began documenting every instance of sabotage, every impossible deadline, every deliberately withheld piece of information, building my own evidence file of systematic workplace harassment. Despite Bethany's sabotage attempts, my relationships with clients continued strengthening in ways that completely bypassed her authority and control. Marcus invited me to his brewery's second anniversary celebration, where I met 5 other local business owners who expressed genuine interest in working with Meridian specifically because of the storytelling approach I had developed for his brand. Elena's referrals proved even more valuable. Her cousin was launching an upscale restaurant in Seattle and wanted the same cultural sensitivity and authentic storytelling that had transformed Elena's fashion boutique. The potential project was worth $50,000, significant revenue that hadn't come through normal sales channels or Bethany's approved marketing efforts. These organic referrals represented the kind of sustainable business growth that traditional agencies struggled to achieve through cold calls and generic presentations. But instead of celebrating this success, Bethany viewed client loyalty as evidence of inappropriate boundary crossing that threatened her control over creative relationships. She began monitoring my email communications with clients, demanding that all contact go through her approval first. When clients specifically requested me for new projects, she would assign them to other team members, claiming it was important to develop everyone's skills equally and prevent unhealthy client dependencies. This controlling behavior frustrated clients who had chosen Meridian specifically because of their positive experience with my personalized approach to their brand challenges. They wanted cultural understanding and authentic storytelling, not generic template solutions delivered by whoever happened to be available. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine whether authentic creative relationships or corporate control would define Meridian's future. The confrontation that would define my career began on a gray Monday morning that felt heavy with unspoken threats. My inbox pinged at 8:47 a.m. with an email that made my coffee taste bitter. Bethany had scheduled an urgent all-hands creative review meeting for 2 p.m., requiring every designer, account manager, and support staff member to attend without exception. The subject line read, "Professional Standards and Portfolio Quality Assessment," words that felt like a death sentence given the mounting tensions over my client relationships. Something was terribly wrong. The office atmosphere crackled with nervous energy and hushed conversations that died the moment I approached. Bethany spent most of the morning locked in Trevor's office, their voices occasionally rising above the glass partition before dropping back to conspiratorial whispers. When I passed by, their conversation would halt abruptly, both pairs of eyes tracking my movement with predatory focus. The most unsettling development was Madison Rivers' presence in the reception area. She sat primly in a visitor's chair, clutching a portfolio case and checking her reflection in her phone screen every few minutes. This was supposedly an informational interview, but everything about her demeanor suggested someone preparing for their first day of work rather than a casual conversation about potential opportunities. I heard Bethany talking to Trevor about making an example of inappropriate client relationships, Sarah Martinez whispered during our coffee break, her eyes darting nervously toward the executive offices. She kept mentioning specific names and talking about documentation. It didn't sound good. My hands trembled as I returned to my desk, instinctively knowing that whatever Bethany had orchestrated would target my work directly. I spent the remaining morning hours frantically backing up my portfolio files to multiple cloud storage accounts, external drives, and even emailing copies to my personal accounts. Years of cultural research, client testimonials, breakthrough campaign concepts, and authentic brand stories, everything that proved my approach generated real business results. When 2 p.m. arrived, 15 staff members filed into the conference room with the nervous energy of students expecting a pop quiz they hadn't studied for. Bethany stood at the front, connecting her laptop to the main display screen with movements that suggested theatrical preparation. Her expression carried grim satisfaction that made my stomach churn with dread. The attack began with deceptive reasonableness. "Today we're going to examine actual case studies of inappropriate client management," Bethany announced, her voice carrying artificial authority. Professional boundaries exist for important reasons, and I want everyone to understand what happens when designers prioritize personal relationships over business standards. My portfolio files appeared on the main screen, months of carefully crafted brand stories, detailed client research, and creative solutions that had generated hundreds of thousands in revenue for Meridian. But Bethany began reframing every success as evidence of professional misconduct with surgical precision. "Let's examine this brewery project," she said, clicking through my research documentation for Marcus Holloway's rebrand. "Notice how the designer spent excessive time researching family history and cultural background instead of focusing on actual design deliverables. This is playing amateur anthropologist instead of doing graphic design work." She highlighted my notes about Marcus's grandfather's German brewing traditions, the interviews with Portland bartenders, the cultural connections between immigration stories and modern entrepreneurship. Work that had transformed a struggling brewery into a thriving business was being presented as evidence of wasted billable hours and inappropriate client involvement. "And here's another example," she continued, pulling up Elena Vasquez's sustainable fashion campaign. "The designer attended family celebrations, learned traditional crafting techniques, and spent weekends in the client's workshop. This is social work masquerading as graphic design." My face burned with humiliation as colleagues shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. They were witnessing successful projects being systematically reframed as professional failures, and everyone understood the implications. Sarah Martinez couldn't make eye contact. Other designers studied their notebooks with obvious discomfort, recognizing that their own client relationships might be scrutinized next. The torture intensified when Bethany began reading direct quotes from my client research files. Personal details about family stories, business dreams, cultural traditions, and emotional connections were transformed into evidence of boundary violations. She was destroying not just my reputation, but the very methodology that had made Meridian more successful than it had been in years. "Professional designers maintain appropriate distance from clients," she proclaimed, clicking through documentation that represented years of relationship building. "Personal involvement creates unrealistic expectations and undermines efficient service delivery." After 30 minutes of systematic character assassination, Bethany reached the climax of her carefully orchestrated performance. With theatrical precision that suggested extensive rehearsal, she selected all my portfolio files, case studies, client research documents, cultural analysis, creative process documentation, breakthrough campaign concepts. "This work is absolute trash," she announced, her voice echoing across the silent conference room with vindictive satisfaction. "Try again if you can." Her finger hovered over the delete button while 15 colleagues stared at their hands, notebooks, anywhere but at the destruction about to unfold. The moment stretched with agonizing tension as everyone processed the cruelty of what was happening. Then she clicked delete. Years of creative work vanished from the screen in a single vindictive moment. Marcus Holloway's family brewing history gone. Elena Vasquez's grandmother's embroidery patterns and cultural research erased. The emotional connections and personal stories that had transformed generic brands into authentic narratives, deleted with deliberate cruelty. The silence that followed was absolute and suffocating. 15 professionals sat frozen, witnessing systematic destruction of work that had generated measurable business success. Bethany turned away from the blank screen with visible satisfaction, clearly expecting me to accept this public humiliation and begin rebuilding according to her template-based standards. She had just eliminated what she believed was evidence of unprofessional conduct, completely unaware that she had actually destroyed the foundation of customer loyalty that kept Meridian profitable and competitive in Portland's creative marketplace. As she began explaining new, professional communication protocols that would prevent future boundary violations, my phone started buzzing against my leg. The caller ID showed Cascade Brand Collective, a name I recognized as one of Portland's most innovative and respected creative agencies. Every professional instinct screamed to ignore the call and focus on the current crisis, but something deeper made me excuse myself from the meeting. "I need to take this," I said quietly, stepping into the hallway while Bethany's voice continued droning about efficiency standards and appropriate client relationships. Diana Walsh's voice on the other end was warm and direct. "Lucia, we've been tracking Meridian's client retention improvements over the past 2 years. And we know exactly who's responsible for the storytelling approach that's keeping major accounts satisfied. My heart pounded as she continued. We've been planning to approach you for months, but recent developments have convinced us that timing is perfect. We're prepared to offer you $400,000 annually to join Cascade as creative director, plus profit-sharing participation and complete autonomy over brand storytelling strategies. $400,000, nearly triple my current compensation, working for people who valued exactly what Bethany had just called unprofessional trash. But the validation mattered more than money. My approach wasn't just correct. It was revolutionary in an industry still obsessed with generic template solutions. Standing in that hallway with the phone in my hand, I realized Bethany had just handed me the perfect weapon for the most elegant revenge imaginable. She thought she was eliminating a problem employee who created unrealistic client expectations. What she had actually done was destroy the only thing preventing Meridian's biggest accounts from walking away forever. I walked back into the conference room where she continued lecturing about efficiency standards while my former colleagues stared at their notebooks in obvious discomfort. The blank screen where my portfolio had been displayed served as the perfect backdrop for what came next. Actually, I said, interrupting her presentation about professional boundaries, I have something to announce. The conference room erupted into chaos as my resignation announcement shattered the controlled atmosphere Bethany had carefully orchestrated. Her face cycled through a rapid succession of emotions, confusion giving way to panic, then anger, and finally desperate calculation as the magnitude of her miscalculation became clear. You can't just quit in the middle of a team meeting, she stammered, her earlier confidence completely evaporated. The woman who had moments before wielded delete buttons like weapons now sounded like a child whose toy had been taken away. There are protocols, notice requirements, transition procedures that need to be followed according to company policy. Her hands gestured frantically as she turned toward Trevor, who had been quietly observing from the back of the room. She was clearly hoping her father-in-law would intervene with some kind of corporate authority that could undo what had just happened. But Trevor's expression revealed that he understood the implications far better than his daughter-in-law did. Bethany, perhaps we should, he began, but she cut him off with increasingly desperate offers. Wait, let's discuss this rationally, she said, her voice rising with each word. I can offer you an immediate raise, project leadership opportunities, even assistant creative director positions. We value your contributions to the team. The irony was breathtaking. Minutes after calling my work absolute trash and deleting it in front of 15 colleagues, she was suddenly offering promotions she clearly had no authority to promise. Her panic was palpable as she realized that destroying my portfolio hadn't eliminated a problem employee. It had just obliterated the foundation of customer loyalty that kept Meridian profitable in Portland's competitive creative marketplace. Madison Rivers shifted uncomfortably in her chair, probably wondering what kind of workplace drama she was about to inherit. The power dynamic in that room had shifted permanently, and everyone could feel the electric tension crackling through the air. Trevor approached me near the conference room door as the meeting dissolved into uncomfortable murmurs and awkward shuffling. His expression carried a gravity that suggested he was performing damage control calculations in real time, understanding this situation far better than his daughter-in-law ever could. Perhaps we should discuss this privately before making any hasty decisions, he said quietly, his voice carrying the practiced diplomacy of someone accustomed to salvaging corporate disasters. I'm sure we can reach a mutually beneficial arrangement that addresses everyone's concerns. But I was completely finished with private discussions and diplomatic solutions that consistently protected Bethany's position while undermining successful creative work. The time for compromise had ended the moment she clicked that delete button. There's nothing to discuss, I replied firmly, gathering my personal items from the conference table with deliberate calm. My decision is final. I'll submit formal resignation paperwork within the hour, and my last day will be today. I could see Trevor's mind racing through financial calculations, the client relationships that would likely follow me, the revenue generation that would disappear, the referrals that had come specifically through my storytelling approach. He was realizing that Bethany's vindictive power play had just cost Meridian its most valuable creative asset during a time when the agency could least afford to lose major accounts. His attempt at damage control had come too late. The consequences of allowing his daughter-in-law's jealousy and insecurity to override sound business sense were now irreversible. As I walked toward the exit, I heard him quietly asking Bethany what exactly she thought she had accomplished with this public spectacle. The 15 staff members in that conference room were experiencing a collective moment of recognition that would permanently reshape their understanding of office politics and workplace dynamics. Some looked genuinely shocked, clearly never having considered that successful employees might resign over treatment they had witnessed but not questioned. Others appeared impressed, possibly reconsidering their own tolerance for workplace abuse disguised as professional standards. A few seemed almost relieved, as if my resignation had given them permission to acknowledge how uncomfortable they had been with Bethany's systematic undermining of obviously successful work. Sarah Martinez caught my eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod that suggested she understood exactly what had transpired and why it was necessary. Her expression conveyed solidarity and respect for someone who had finally stood up to behavior that everyone recognized as wrong but no one had felt empowered to challenge. The younger designers looked confused and concerned, probably wondering if creative work was always this politically complicated or if Meridian represented an unusually toxic work environment. Their faces showed the dawning realization that talent and results didn't necessarily protect you from vindictive supervisors with family connections. Most tellingly, Madison Rivers appeared horrified by the workplace dynamics she was about to inherit. Whatever romanticized vision she'd had of agency life was being replaced by the harsh reality of office politics, family favoritism, and creative work being weaponized for personal vendettas. The uncomfortable silence revealed that everyone understood the real story unfolding before them. A talented employee had just been pushed out by someone whose authority came from family connections rather than creative competence, and the consequences would be severe for everyone remaining at Meridian. Walking back to my desk felt surreal, like moving through a space that had already become part of my past. I gathered personal items while colleagues watched from their workstations with a mixture of fascination and concern. Some offered quiet words of support, while others maintained carefully neutral expressions that suggested they were already calculating how my departure might affect their own positions and job security. My desk had been a creative sanctuary filled with inspiration boards showcasing cultural artifacts from client research, thank you notes from satisfied business owners, sketches of breakthrough concepts, and photos from brand launch events where I had watched entrepreneurs celebrate authentic storytelling solutions that transformed their businesses. Now it looked strangely impersonal as I packed these meaningful objects into a cardboard box. Each item represented relationships and creative victories that would be leaving with me. The most symbolic moment came when I unplugged my external hard drive containing backup copies of all my creative work, the very files Bethany thought she had destroyed forever. I deliberately left behind company equipment, official project files, and anything that belonged to Meridian. But I took with me the relationships, cultural insights, and creative philosophy that had generated their most successful client outcomes in years. These intangible assets couldn't be deleted or controlled by vindictive supervisors. As I signed final paperwork with HR, heated conversations echoed from Trevor's office, suggesting that the real reckoning between father-in-law and daughter-in-law was just beginning. The administrative assistant processing my resignation paperwork looked genuinely sad to see me go, mentioning that several clients had specifically complimented my work in recent feedback surveys. Before I had even finished my exit interview, my personal phone began buzzing with calls from clients who had somehow already learned about my departure through Portland's tight-knit business community. The speed of communication in creative industries was remarkable. News traveled through networking events, coffee shop conversations, and social media connections faster than any official corporate announcement. Marcus Holloway called first, his voice carrying genuine concern. "Lucia, I heard through the grapevine that you might be leaving Meridian. Is that true? We've got the seasonal campaign coming up and I was hoping to continue working with you on the packaging design." Elena Vasquez sent a text message within minutes. "Please tell me the rumors aren't true about you leaving Meridian. Should I be worried about our current projects? You're the only designer who's ever understood our brand story." These immediate reactions revealed something Bethany had fundamentally misunderstood about client loyalty in creative industries. The relationships weren't tied to Meridian's brand reputation or corporate identity. They were personal connections forged with the individual who had taken time to understand family stories and translate them into authentic creative solutions. Within hours, I received 6 different client inquiries about my new position and whether I would be accepting freelance projects during my transition period. Each conversation reinforced the same reality that Bethany had been too blinded by jealousy to recognize. She had assumed that destroying my portfolio would eliminate evidence of unprofessional conduct, but what she had actually done was sever the personal connections that kept Meridian's most valuable accounts satisfied with their creative partnership. The phone calls that afternoon were just the beginning of a client exodus that would permanently reshape Portland's creative agency landscape. The systematic destruction of Meridian Creative Studios began unfolding with clockwork precision during my first week at Cascade Brand Collective. While I immersed myself in learning their collaborative creative process and building relationships with my new team, disturbing reports filtered back through Portland's interconnected creative community about the chaos erupting at my former workplace. Bethany had immediately thrust Madison Rivers into handling my former client accounts, apparently operating under the naive assumption that any designer could maintain relationships built on years of personal storytelling and deep cultural understanding. The disconnect was immediate and catastrophic. The first disaster struck when Madison attempted to present campaign revisions to Marcus Holloway using Bethany's rigid template-based approach. According to Sarah Martinez, who called me during her lunch break to share the gossip, Marcus had spent the entire meeting asking detailed questions about elements of his family's brewing heritage that Madison had never heard of and couldn't begin to address. She kept shuffling through papers looking confused, Sarah whispered into her phone. When Marcus asked about incorporating the German brewing timeline we developed, she suggested using generic, craft beer lifestyle imagery instead. He looked like someone had just told him his grandfather never existed. The meeting had ended abruptly when Marcus politely thanked Madison for her time and requested to speak with Trevor directly about continuity concerns with his brand development. The subtext was clear. He was questioning whether Meridian could still deliver the cultural authenticity that had made his rebrand so successful. Similar disasters were erupting across my former client roster. Elena Vasquez had scheduled a consultation about expanding her sustainable fashion line's cultural messaging, only to discover that Madison knew absolutely nothing about traditional Mexican embroidery techniques or the ancestral wisdom that connected sustainable practices to family heritage. The poor girl tried to suggest we focus on general eco-friendly themes instead. Elena had texted me directly. She kept asking why we needed to complicate things with cultural stories when simple environmental messaging would be easier to execute. Madison was undoubtedly talented at executing predetermined concepts and following established templates, but she was completely unprepared for the cultural sensitivity, historical research, and personal relationship building that had made these client partnerships so valuable. Bethany had assumed that design skills were interchangeable, missing the fundamental truth that authentic brand storytelling required years of trust building and cultural competence. By the end of my first month at Cascade, the financial devastation at Meridian had become impossible to conceal from Portland's tight-knit business community. Industry contacts were sharing increasingly alarming reports about client defections that went far beyond anything I had anticipated. 11 former clients representing over 70% of Meridian's annual billings had either terminated their contracts outright or announced they would not renew when current projects concluded. The speed and scale of departures was unprecedented in Portland's creative agency landscape. Marcus Holloway's brewery, which had generated $85,000 in revenue over 2 years, had officially switched to Cascade specifically to continue working with me on their upcoming expansion campaign. His decision sent shockwaves through the industry because established clients rarely changed agencies mid-campaign unless something had gone seriously wrong. Elena Vasquez had not only moved her sustainable fashion account but actively recommended 3 other conscious retail brands who valued the cultural storytelling approach that Meridian had systematically eliminated. Her referrals represented potential new business worth over $120,000 annually, revenue that would have normally flowed to Meridian through their existing relationship. The most devastating loss was probably the Pacific Northwest Restaurant Group, a hospitality client who had maintained loyalty to Meridian for 4 years across various property rebrands. They had stayed specifically because of the personal attention their family business received, understanding that their Italian-American heritage required cultural sensitivity that generic agencies couldn't provide. When they discovered that their longtime creative contact was no longer available and that future projects would follow standardized restaurant branding templates, they terminated their relationship within 2 weeks. Their departure eliminated $60,000 in annual billings and removed a prestigious portfolio piece that had attracted other hospitality clients. Each client departure created cascading ripple effects as former accounts shared their experiences with other business owners throughout Portland's interconnected entrepreneurial community. Word spread through coffee shop conversations, networking events, and social media discussions that Meridian had fundamentally changed their approach to client relationships. Trevor's emergency board meetings had become weekly occurrences as investors demanded explanations for how an agency could lose most of its major accounts within 30 days. The financial projections were becoming increasingly dire. As the client exodus accelerated beyond all reasonable expectations, Bethany's desperate attempts at damage control revealed just how completely she had misunderstood the nature of creative client relationships that extended beyond simple vendor arrangements. She began making personal calls to former clients, offering significant discount rates and promising improved service standards if they would reconsider their departures. These conversations backfired spectacularly because she couldn't answer basic questions about brand histories or personal details that had been central to their creative strategies. When Marcus asked about incorporating his family's brewing timeline into future campaigns, Bethany admitted she had no idea what he was referring to, making it painfully clear that all institutional knowledge about his brand had departed with me. Elena received a similar call where Bethany suggested they could simplify the cultural elements to make projects more efficient, completely missing the point that cultural authenticity was the foundation of Elena's brand identity. Recognizing that she lacked the cultural competence to rebuild these relationships, Bethany attempted to hire freelance designers who specialized in storytelling approaches. But without the detailed client research, cultural understanding, and personal trust that had taken years to develop, their efforts felt generic and performative. Most desperately, she began actively criticizing my work to remaining clients, suggesting that my departure represented an opportunity to return to professional design standards, rather than acknowledging that my approach had been the primary driver of their recent success. These conversations only reinforced clients' decisions to seek creative partners who valued personal connections rather than dismissing them as unprofessional boundary violations. The true scope of Bethany's miscalculation became crystal clear during Meridian's quarterly financial review, when Trevor discovered that the agency was facing its worst revenue decline in company history. The client departures hadn't just eliminated current income streams. They had completely destroyed the referral network that had been driving sustainable new business growth for over 2 years. The reputation damage was spreading exponentially through Portland's business community as former clients shared their experiences with other entrepreneurs who were considering creative agency partnerships. Trevor began receiving increasingly uncomfortable calls from board members and investors questioning the leadership decisions that had led to such catastrophic client loss during what should have been a period of expansion and growth. The family business dynamics that had previously protected Bethany's position were now becoming a significant liability. Cameron faced mounting pressure from his father and other family stakeholders to either control his wife's management approach or remove her from a position where her decisions were systematically destroying generational wealth. Emergency meetings with financial advisors revealed that Meridian might need to consider merger opportunities with larger agencies or implement significant downsizing measures to survive the revenue crisis. Trevor was finally realizing that protecting his daughter-in-law's authority had cost him the creative talent that had been rebuilding his agency's reputation and financial stability over the past 2 years. By month 3, the consequences had extended far beyond immediate client losses to fundamental damage of Meridian's position in Portland's competitive creative marketplace. Industry publications were covering the situation as a case study of how agencies could destroy valuable client relationships through poor leadership decisions, though professional courtesy prevented them from naming Meridian directly. However, the creative community understood every detail, and the story had become a cautionary tale shared at professional networking events and design conferences across the Pacific Northwest. The narrative was spreading that Meridian had driven away successful talent through internal politics rather than supporting approaches that generated measurable business results. Talented designers began actively avoiding Meridian's job postings, recognizing that an agency which had systematically eliminated its most successful creative professional might not represent a stable or rewarding career choice. New client inquiries dropped dramatically as business owners heard through professional networks about the client exodus and management problems. Most damaging was the complete loss of creative credibility that had taken years to establish. Meridian had built its recent reputation on personal storytelling and authentic brand development, but the systematic destruction of those capabilities had reduced them to offering generic template services that dozens of other agencies could provide more cost-effectively. The competitive advantage I had built for them was gone forever, replaced by industry recognition as an agency that prioritized internal politics over client success and creative excellence. The transformation of my professional life at Cascade Brand Collective exceeded every expectation I had harbored about what creative work could accomplish when freed from corporate constraints and vindictive supervision. Within 6 months, I was experiencing the profound satisfaction of operating in an environment that genuinely valued creative storytelling and authentic client relationships as core business principles rather than inefficient luxuries. Unlike Meridian's suffocating hierarchy and rigid template-based approach, Cascade operated on truly collaborative principles where innovative ideas were celebrated regardless of their source or complexity. My colleagues didn't view cultural research as time-wasting. They recognized it as the foundation of breakthrough creative work that generated sustainable business results. My first major project involved rebranding a Portland-based sustainable technology startup, and Diana Walsh gave me complete freedom to explore the founder's fascinating background as a former environmental scientist who had abandoned academia to develop practical clean energy solutions. The resulting brand identity told a compelling story about scientific passion translating into entrepreneurial action, creating emotional connections that resonated far beyond typical startup messaging. The campaign's success was immediate and measurable. The authentic storytelling approach helped the startup articulate their mission during investor presentations, ultimately contributing to their successful $2.3 million series of funding round. The lead investor specifically mentioned being moved by the brand story during the pitch process. Diana actively encouraged the research methodology that Bethany had systematically criticized and undermined. Deep client understanding isn't inefficiency, she explained during our first creative review. It's the competitive advantage that separates memorable brands from forgettable ones. My colleagues at Cascade included award-winning designers and strategic thinkers who viewed cultural sensitivity and personal storytelling as essential professional skills rather than unprofessional boundary violations. The office atmosphere was everything I had dreamed a creative agency could be: intellectually stimulating, professionally supportive, and financially rewarding for work that made meaningful differences in clients' business success. The most validating aspect of my success at Cascade was witnessing how organically former Meridian clients transitioned their business to continue working with me in my new environment. These weren't orchestrated recruitment efforts or calculated client theft. They were natural relationship migrations that proved the value of authentic creative partnerships. Marcus Holloway's brewery expansion project became one of Cascade's most celebrated campaigns, generating significant industry recognition and winning 3 major awards for authentic brand storytelling. The campaign successfully positioned his brewery's expansion into Washington state markets by honoring both Portland heritage and broader Pacific Northwest craft beer culture. Elena Vasquez's sustainable fashion brand flourished under our continued creative partnership. We launched a successful e-commerce platform that celebrated traditional Mexican craftsmanship while addressing modern environmental concerns through storytelling that connected ancestral wisdom to contemporary sustainability practices. Her online sales increased 280% within 8 months. Most significantly, these satisfied clients became enthusiastic advocates for Cascade's approach, generating referrals that brought in over $400,000 in new business during my first year. The Pacific Northwest Restaurant Group not only followed me to Cascade but expanded their creative partnership to include digital marketing and experiential design services they had never previously considered. Each successful project reinforced the same fundamental truth that Bethany had been too blind to recognize. Clients valued authentic relationships and meaningful creative solutions over efficiency metrics and template-based design work. My client retention rate at Cascade reached 98%, compared to Meridian's industry average 60%, proving that personal connection wasn't unprofessional conduct but rather the highest form of creative service. The revenue these relationships generated allowed Cascade to expand their staff, invest in cutting-edge design technologies, and establish additional Portland offices that competed directly with much larger agencies. I had become part of building something genuinely innovative rather than maintaining something systemically broken. 8 months after my departure from Meridian, I received a phone call that completed the ironic circle of professional vindication with almost poetic justice. Trevor Ashford contacted me personally, requesting a private meeting to discuss what he euphemistically described as significant partnership opportunities. We met at a downtown Portland coffee shop where Trevor's desperation was immediately apparent. His usual confident demeanor had been replaced by the nervous energy of someone whose business was failing and who needed help he was embarrassed to request. "Lucia, I'll be direct," he began, stirring his coffee with obvious discomfort. "We need your expertise to restore client confidence and rebuild our creative reputation. I'm prepared to offer you executive creative director position with complete autonomy over our creative department, equity participation, and a compensation package that would double your current Cascade salary." The irony was breathtaking. He was essentially offering me Bethany's job at triple my original salary, finally acknowledging that the approach she had called absolute trash was actually the only thing that could save Meridian from complete collapse. "Bethany's management approach created some unforeseen challenges," he continued, unable to directly admit that his daughter-in-law had nearly destroyed the family business through vindictive leadership and professional jealousy. "We need fresh creative leadership that understands client relationship building." I listened politely to his entire presentation, watching him struggle to explain how an agency could lose 70% of its revenue within 3 months without explicitly blaming his son's wife. The desperation in his voice was palpable as he outlined increasingly generous terms: signing bonuses, creative control, even partnership opportunities. When he finished, I declined with the same professional courtesy that Meridian had never shown during my original employment. "I appreciate the offer, Trevor, but I'm very happy with my current position." Cascade understood the value of authentic client relationships from day one, rather than learning it through crisis. Returning to Meridian would have been professional suicide. Why rebuild something I could create better elsewhere? The most satisfying element of this entire revenge story wasn't my personal success, but watching Bethany face the natural consequences of her own vindictive leadership style and fundamental misunderstanding of creative business principles. 6 months after driving away Meridian's most valuable creative talent, she was quietly removed from her creative director position during what Trevor diplomatically called organizational restructuring. Her replacement was an experienced professional from Seattle who immediately began the difficult work of rebuilding client relationships and creative reputation that Bethany had systematically destroyed. Industry sources revealed that her departure followed mounting client complaints about unprofessional conduct, consistently missed deadlines, and creative work that failed to meet basic quality standards. The board had finally recognized that family connections couldn't substitute for professional competence indefinitely. Her attempts to find comparable creative director positions at other Portland agencies were uniformly unsuccessful. The professional community understood her central role in Meridian's near collapse, and her portfolio lacked the innovative storytelling work that had become industry standard throughout the Pacific Northwest. Madison Rivers, the inexperienced designer who had been brought in to replace me, lasted only 4 months before accepting a junior position at a smaller firm. She had finally recognized that she had been set up to fail in a situation requiring cultural competence and relationship-building skills she hadn't yet developed. Bethany's career became a cautionary tale shared at creative industry conferences about how personal jealousy and poor leadership could destroy not only individual careers but entire agency reputations. Her name was mentioned in professional development workshops as an example of management approaches that prioritized control over results. 2 years after walking out of that humiliating conference room, I lead creative strategy for one of Portland's most innovative brand collectives, working daily with entrepreneurs who appreciate having their personal stories honored and their business visions brought to life through authentic creative partnerships that generate measurable business results. Every successful project reinforces the fundamental lesson that meaningful work creates its own protection. When you genuinely serve others' success, they become invested in yours as well. The relationships I built through cultural sensitivity and personal attention proved more valuable than any corporate hierarchy or family business protection. Bethany's downfall required no elaborate schemes or calculated attacks from me. I simply allowed her own poor decisions to create their natural consequences while building something extraordinary elsewhere. The most elegant revenge is always letting incompetent people demonstrate their incompetence while you focus on excellence that speaks for itself. Today, when young designers approach me asking about handling difficult supervisors or navigating toxic creative environments, I share this story as proof that talent and authentic client service ultimately triumph over office politics and petty jealousy. The creative work that Bethany dismissed as absolute trash now generates millions in revenue and consistent industry recognition, while her career serves as a permanent reminder that destroying others' success never creates your own. Sometimes the most satisfying victory is simply thriving creatively while your former tormentors face the natural consequences of their own terrible judgment and vindictive choices. If this creative revenge story had you cheering for justice, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Bethany deleted my portfolio, not knowing she just destroyed her own career. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more workplace revenge stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.